If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain how I found out about this. It's free. It's on your app store. There's a creation tool that allows you to record and edit your podcast right now from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Please, I urge you, don't waste another minute. I wasted 3 years. I attended all kinds of events to learn all the steps. I was so confused, and it was right here. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Do it now. Good Saturday, March 27, 2021. I'm Sabah Fakhoury, your host for the Heart and Home podcast. A review of what happened this week. I liked it better when people stayed in their homes. In the past week, since the American economy began getting back to normal, we've witnessed 2 massacres. 8 people were gunned down in the Atlanta, Georgia area last week. And this week, a 21-year-old drove 20 miles from his home and opened fire at King Soopers supermarket in Boulder, Colorado on Monday. 10 people, including a police officer, lost their lives. The first police officer to arrive on the scene, Eric Talley, 51, was among those named by the Boulder, Colorado police. He leaves behind 7 children. The chief also identified the names and ages of the 8 other victims. Oh, this is not the only thing that happened. So it was Denny Stong, 20, Nevin Stanisic, 23, Trelona Bartkowiak, 49, Suzanne Fountain, 59, Terry Leaker, 51, Kevin Mahoney, 61, Lynn Murray, 62, Jody Waters, 65. This is the 7th mass shooting in 7 days. There were others besides the mass shooting in Colorado supermarket on Monday. The U.S. has now had over 100 mass shootings in the last 3 full months in 2021. That's a lot. Well, here's what we know about the Boulder, Colorado mass shooting suspect. You've seen him on the news. He was identified as Ahmed Alawi Alissa, the gunman who opened fire at King Soopers grocery store in Colorado that killed 10 people, including a Boulder police officer. The motive is still haunting investigators who say the suspect bought the gun 6 days before the shootout. Oh, and by the way, he did pass the background check. We find that out today. So what I found interesting is in this case, the first case involving an Arab man, he was not called a terrorist. He was not labeled as a Muslim. He was labeled as a gunman and a white man. And the reason why I'm saying this is we learned that Alissa, he's from a family that came here from Syria when he was 3 years old. And he may have been suffering from mental illness, according to his 34-year-old brother. Now, his brother told CNN on Tuesday that in high school, bullies made fun of Alissa's name and for being Muslim, and that may have contributed to him becoming antisocial. I don't know. I mean, the guy's 21 years old. It's been quite a while since he got bullied at school. I can see the part about being antisocial, but we still don't know whether he targeted someone specifically at the grocery store and why he would drive 20 miles from his home to go and just open fire on somebody. Oh, that's a big mystery. May they all rest in peace. So the gunman actually appeared in court this week, and he sat there quietly. When the judge asked him, did he know what, the charges against him? He replied yes. However, his defense attorneys said they needed more time to look into his psychiatric condition. So the judge ordered the gunman held without bail until another hearing in the next 2 to 3 months. Meanwhile, in Washington, President Biden called for tightening gun laws after the Colorado deadly shooting, and that revived debate on Capitol Hill. So Mr. Biden urged Congress to pass legislation approved by the House earlier this month that would, among other things, expand background checks. He also called on Congress to ban assault-style weapons such as the kind used by the Boulder, Colorado suspect. Not everybody is going for that one. The former president, Barack Obama, posted the following. Michelle and I grieve with the families of the victims of the shooting in Boulder, just as we grieve with the families of the people killed in Atlanta and everyone else who has lost a loved one to gun violence. We are also grateful for the courage of Officer Eric Talley, who ran into danger to protect others, and we hope his memory and the memory of all those we've lost will not be in vain. Because, in addition to grief, we are also feeling a deep, familiar outrage that we as a nation continue to tolerate these kinds of random, senseless acts day in and day out without taking any significant action, an outrage that people in Colorado have known far too often over the years, because, of course, they've had other incidents there. In so many ways, former President Obama goes on to say, our lives may soon start to return to normal after a long, difficult year filled with so much loss. But in a normal life, we should be able to buy groceries without fear. We should be able to go to school, or go out with our friends, or worship together without mentally planning our escape if someone shows up with a gun. We should be able to live our lives without wondering if the next trip outside our home could be our last. We should, but in America, we can't. It is long past time for those with the power to fight this epidemic of gun violence to do so. It will take time to root out the disaffection, racism, and misogyny that fuels so many of these senseless acts of violence. But we can make it harder for those with hate in their hearts to buy weapons of war. We can overcome opposition by cowardly politicians and the pressure of a gun lobby that opposes any limit on the ability of anyone to assemble an arsenal. We can, and we must. A once-in-a-century pandemic cannot be the only thing that slows mass shootings in this country. We shouldn't have to choose between one type of tragedy and another. It's time for leaders everywhere to listen to the American people when they say enough is enough, because this is a normal we can no longer afford. That was former President Barack Obama. And a little bit different of a note, I received an email this morning from Jonathan Fields, who's a podcaster of the Good Life Project. And you can hear his podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Oh, and I forgot to mention that President Barack Obama and Bruce Springsteen also have a podcast on Spotify. If you haven't heard that one, Renegades.
I really recommend it. Okay, so here's what Jonathan Fields emailed us this morning, those that are on his list. Hey there, I'm in Boulder, Colorado. Made the journey here from New York City in September with my family. So yes, I was in town this week when the awful news hit. My texts and DMs were flooded by friends checking in on us. We are. I was about to add okay or safe to the end of those, and I am so grateful to be here to write and think and hug and love given the loss of humanity this week. But really, my mind just keeps asking, is anyone safe or okay anymore? Okay, so then his email goes on to talk about his love of Colorado, how he discovered it when he was in high school and his trips there. And then he continues his email with so much loss, devastation, and not just this week in Boulder, but in different places, times, contexts, and communities. I cannot wrap my head around the fact that this time last week, I was writing about another shooting. Last week. I don't know how many other ways exist to channel tears into words and words into deeds, and I don't know what that looks or feels like in the unique context of your life. All I know is we can't keep on going. We can't keep on keeping on. We are not safe. We are not okay. Question is, when we stop running from this truth, what will we do with it? What will we do with it? So it makes you think, why can't we stop this? Why do we have this recurring problem? Why are all the shooters all men? Why? And yet more and more senseless killings keep happening over and over and over again. I just keep thinking back to Sandy Hook, and I mean, there were so many, but when children were involved, that was just the saddest. A piece in CNN, an analysis piece, ran, a return to normal in America means, you guessed it, a return to violence. Mass shootings signal a dubious, quote, back to normal in America. Yeah, I guess we're back to normal, all right. You notice that we didn't hear anything the last year. No shootings, no bad news. I know that domestic violence was up. I'm not saying that bad things didn't happen. Okay, so the CNN analysis piece continues with, the most recent string of senseless gun violence began March 16 when a shooter killed 8 people at 3 Atlanta spas. The next day, a drive-by in Stockton, California, injured 5 people who'd gathered for a vigil. 4 people were hospitalized Thursday after shooting in Gresham, Oregon. On Saturday, a pair of shootings at clubs in Dallas and Houston left a young woman dead and 12 people injured. Shortly thereafter, a shooter opened fire at what Philadelphia police termed an illegal party, killing 1 man and injuring 5 more. Now Boulder makes 7 in 7 days. When the gunfire at King Soopers stopped, 10 lay dead, including hero officer Eric Talley, the first policeman on the scene. His wife and 7 children will pay an astronomical debt for their dad's bravery. Former President Barack Obama called for action Tuesday, expressing disbelief that only COVID-19 could quell the gun violence the country has long endured. Oh, by the way, there was another shooting today, and I believe one was killed in Virginia Beach. So, I mean, every day, if you watch the local news, you get it in your area. Most of them lead with it. And then the piece concludes with, for the mass shootings that did unfold amid the pandemic, their locations were frighteningly familiar. Buffalo, Minnesota, a health clinic, a bowling alley in Rockford, Illinois, a Wauwatosa, Wisconsin mall, a party in Rochester, New York, and in Washington, D.C., and a brewery in Milwaukee, where authorities would learn later the gunman had been employed. And then you know about the supermarket and then the massage parlors. The Biden administration, meanwhile, the officials are putting together a plan for a multi-part economic and jobs package that could cost as much as $3 trillion. And they're trying to get the economy started, in addition to getting everybody inoculated. The first proposal would center on infrastructure projects and include many of the climate change initiatives Mr. Biden outlined in his, quote, Build Back Better plan. That package would be followed by measures focusing on education and other priorities. Meanwhile, President Biden gave his first formal press conference on Thursday, and a very interesting piece ran in the British Mail. The story was kind of making fun of our president. It said, photos show Biden, 78, relied on 14-point font prompt cards during his first press conference, including one with headshots of reporters he planned to call on. And then they happened to mention that he lost his train of thought. And, well, like I said, they were making fun of our president. Also Thursday, big tech's Jack Dorsey of Twitter, Sundar Pichai of Google parent Alphabet, and Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook were scolded by lawmakers when they testified remotely before House lawmakers' questions about online misinformation. Lawmakers blamed big tech companies for an array of societal problems on Thursday, and they claimed that in the 5 hours that the hearings went on, they just accused the three companies of running social media platforms that, quote, sow political discord, spread COVID-19 misinformation, and create a dangerous environment for children. Well, of course, you know, the CEOs pushed back. Much of the hearing focused on Section 230, which is a law that they're looking into changing, that shields online platforms from liability for the content that their users post, but also gives the platforms broad discretion to remove that content. And I guess there are complaints that they're not removing it fast enough. So that's always been an ongoing problem. Now on to weather. At least 6 people have died after at least 23 tornadoes tore through the states of Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia on Thursday. Tornadoes flattened homes, leaving countless injured and many homeless after a storm system left a 100-mile path of destruction as it moved through the south part of the United States. 45 million are in that storm's path this weekend. And as I speak and record this podcast Saturday evening, we have rain going on outside my window as well. Although I'm sure nothing close to what the rest of the people are going to be encountering. Our winds are not that high. Okay, now, did you hear the news that Krispy Kreme announced this week they're going to give a free donut? You know, those glazed ones, to anyone who shows their COVID-19 vaccination card this year? Well, not everybody was too happy about that. So they had quite a few reactions on social media for pushing to get vaccinated or pushing donuts on people that might not think of it as too wise of a choice to make. I'm going for my donut. I don't know about you. Okay, the U.S. has set a new vaccine record Friday with 3.4 million doses administered in one day. However, we're not out of the woods yet. You keep hearing me say that, don't you? Newly reported coronavirus cases in the U.S. edged higher, but remained below 50,000. And you know that we talked about here in my state, in Michigan, how our numbers had spiked and we made national news across the country. And actually, in my hometown of Dearborn, 1 in 10 people contracted coronavirus. So people still need to wear masks. You still need to be diligent. And even though you might have one vaccine or maybe the second one, you still have to be mindful that not everybody is vaccinated. Also this week, U.S. officials said the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are now safe for pregnant women and could give your unborn baby antibodies it needs. That was interesting. To date, roughly 1 in 4 Americans has received at least 1 dose of a COVID vaccine. Here in the United States, where AstraZeneca has yet to be approved, those who have gotten inoculations made by either Pfizer or Moderna, which are both administered in 2 doses, often get more intense symptoms after the second dose. Here's what others are saying and what you might expect. Some have complained of feeling like they got a flu, experiencing fever, aches, fatigue, or mild dizziness is a common side effect. Don't worry. These symptoms last for a day or 2, or in some cases a week for some. Therefore, it's best to schedule your second shot on a Friday so you have the weekend to rest, or for those who work weekends, have your second shot administered before you have a few days off. The 1-shot vaccine from Johnson & Johnson has similar side effects. Experts say side effects are a sign that your immune system is doing its job, and other side effects could be a sore arm, so keep it moving every hour, drink plenty of water before and after getting jabbed, and take time to rest and eat healthy meals. But I'm not advocating that you have to get your shot. It's everybody's choice to make their own decision. And in case you heard what some are now calling outrageous, the former CDC director, Robert Redfield, appeared on CNN and said that he believed that COVID-19 originated from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, but provided no evidence and no data. The former director of the CDC also told CNN he believes SARS-CoV-2 began spreading as early as September 2019. September 2019. So that would be the fall. We didn't hear about it until December 2019, and then we didn't go into lockdown until March 2020. So we are talking a lot of time had gone by for this virus to spread. Do you think it's equally outrageous for a media outlet to amplify his accusations to get higher ratings? Well, Fauci rejected that idea, and he said it contradicts the assessment of the World Health Organization and most public health experts. By the way, the World Health Organization is going to have a report on the origin of the virus, and that is going to be expected to be released perhaps as soon as next week. They were in Wuhan, they were studying, and they met with people there, and we're going to try to figure out where it originated. Now, some people might think, some people think that, it was from bats. The hypothesis that the coronavirus jumped from bats to humans via a wild animal sold as a food delicacy in Wuhan's markets has one big problem. No one could find the animal that gave people COVID-19. Whatever. I've even heard the reason we have the current pandemic is because of our mistreatment of our planet. You know what? The flu virus has been with us every year. There are just different strains, different, I mean, I don't know why we get the flu. I mean, just, we get it. It's out there. Our body can't fight it. Well, the French Le Monde newspaper had a cartoon. They didn't care where the virus was coming from. They had this big plane and these big boxes, and they said, well, the virus was free, but you have to pay for the masks. Okay, yeah, not so funny. Meanwhile, a Bloomberg columnist said, quote, "We must start planning for a permanent pandemic. Recent developments suggest that we may never achieve herd immunity." And you know what? A lot of people do not want to get this vaccine. Despite all the numbers of people getting vaccinated, you're still going to have a lot of people that refuse it. And the main reason that this Bloomberg columnist said is that it's the ongoing emergence of new variants that behave almost like new viruses. Well, how do you think coverage of the pandemic has been? In a New York Times piece published this week, it headlined the following: "The U.S. media is offering a different picture of COVID-19 from science journals or the international media, a study finds." Okay, now this is something that I would get into. I don't know if you're into this or not, but I just wanted to share this because it's so on point. And here's how the article goes. It was in the New York Times on, I think, March 24, just a couple days ago. It says, "Is bad news the only kind? Question mark. And then it goes on to interview a Dartmouth College economics professor called Bruce Sacerdote, who he noticed that last year the coverage of COVID-19, when he was watching CNN and PBS, it almost always seemed negative to him, regardless of what he was seeing in the data or hearing from scientists he knew. So he decided he would check it out. And so he looked at the news coverage, then he went to his friends, and then he got a couple more people to get involved. So they went and got coverage, and they looked at stories from the major networks, CNN, Fox News, Politico, the New York Times, and hundreds of other sources in the United States and overseas. And then they analyzed everything that was in the social science journals, and they looked at it to see whether the language positive, neutral, or negative. I think you know where this is going. So the results showed exactly as Sacerdote's instinct was, that he was right. And not just because the pandemic was, mostly a grim story. The study finds that the coverage by the U.S. publications with a national audience has been more negative than coverage by any other source that the researchers analyzed. So this included scientific journals, major international publications, and regional U.S. media. The most well-read U.S. media are outliers in terms of their negativity, Molly Cook said, the co-author of the study. About 87% of COVID coverage in national U.S. media last year was negative. The share was 51% in international media, 53% in U.S. regional media, and 64% in scientific journals. So the highest was national U.S. media, 87. Then next down, 51% in the international media and 53 in regional media. So that would be like the local papers that don't have national reach. And then 64% in scientific journals. So That's like almost 25% higher in the national media, things like CNN, the New York Times, big outlets like that showed that it was more negative than what the scientific journals were saying. And notably, the coverage was negative in both U.S. media outlets with liberal audiences like MSNBC and those with conservative audiences like Fox News. Okay, so then what they concluded is that this study, which the National Bureau of Economic Research has published as a working paper, it's titled, "Why is All COVID-19 News Bad News?" So the person who ran this article in the New York Times said that it calls for self-reflection from those in the media. And he says that if the media is constantly telling a negative story, then they're not giving their audience the most accurate portrait of reality. They do a good job telling why COVID cases are rising in some places and how the vaccines are imperfect, but not such a good job explaining why cases are falling elsewhere or how the vaccines save lives. Case in point, just what happened last week in Michigan. So another co-author said, the media is painting a picture that is a little bit different from what the scientists are saying. But what they found is that they're not sure what explains their findings because they do have a leading contender. The U.S. media is giving the audience what it wants. So when the researchers examined which stories were the most read or the most shared on Facebook, they tended to be the most negative stories. So the stories that people choose to read skew more negative than the stories that media organizations choose to publish. Human beings, particularly consumers of major media, like negativity in their stories. And the media knows this. That's why they run things like that. And so the authors of the study are saying we think the major media are responding to consumer demand. Of course, because it means they sell more newspapers, their ratings are higher. They know people that are going to be sitting on ads. They know what nail biter stories that they need to focus on. That's why they're in the news business. That idea is consistent with the patterns in the data. It makes sense that national publications have better instincts about reaching a large audience than a scientific journal. And overseas, some of the most influential English language media organizations like the BBC that receive government funding potentially make them less focused on consumer demand. So knowing where you get your source of information is very important, and that's why you want to look at different publications. So like when I look at my news, I would look at the Wall Street Journal, I will look at National Public Radio, I will look at Canadian, I will look at the wire services. Each one has a different angle and each one has its own way of reporting. And of course, I'm a big fan of CNN as I interned there, and I always watch them no matter what. It's just a habit. You go right to them. Fox, no, I don't turn them on. I am not interested in that. But always keep in mind that the source that you actually, where you get your news from, and I'm not talking about from your friends or Facebook feed. I'm talking about where if you consume news regularly, it makes a big difference on how you actually see the world. And I'm going to share a story that I've never told anybody before. But I'm not just trying to say that I'm anti anything, but I remember one day my neighbor came to me, and this was the time when, right after the election in November, where we didn't know who had won. And this was before we really found out that President Trump had lost the election and that Joe Biden had won. So my neighbor came up to me and he said, Biden is going to jail and so is his son. He is bad. He's, what did he call him? I think he called him a crook. And he was mentioning something about China. And I was like, what? Where did you hear that? And he kept saying that Trump was going to be our new president. And I was like, what? So I went and checked all the news. I watched the evening news. Nobody said anything. All they talked about Biden was he had some problem with an ankle, or he had gone for some kind of medical. And I'm trying to think, where did my neighbor get this information? So the next day, I went looking for him. I called on him and I knocked on the door and I said, excuse me, where did you hear this information from? And guess what? He said, oh, I listened to Fox News. I said, well, I don't. That's why I didn't know what he was talking about. So not to say that I'm anti anything, I am just saying that the outlets that you listen to make a big difference. And this study highlights that. And I talk more about this in my book. I am writing a book called Interruptive Journalism, where I'm going to cover specific topics that are in the news. And this is something that is my area of interest. So, and you know, I always tell you, if it bleeds, it leads. Because those are the rules of journalism. They're not reinventing the wheel. This is nothing new. If you're in the business, you know this. Okay, back to the coronavirus. On Tuesday this week, U.S. regulators announced they had been told AstraZeneca may have released outdated information in its disclosure of trial results for its COVID-19 vaccine, which could have provided an incomplete view of the efficacy data. And as you know, the AstraZeneca vaccine has not been approved in the U.S. They were doing a trial data here, but now news has come out that the company had cherry-picked results to make the shot appear more effective. So Dr. Anthony Fauci said it could undermine faith in what is, quote, very likely a very good vaccine. It's not as good as Pfizer and Moderna. They have much higher rates. So anyways, I want to share with you a story that ran by the AP this week about a couple that was affected by the pandemic. And so often we just look at numbers of people that pass away. And I remember in the beginning, they were showing a lot of stories and faces of people that we had lost and covering who these people were. And we've kind of moved away from that, where now it's just like every day, all they keep doing is telling us how many people. It's all like a numbers, okay? But this story that the AP ran, I thought just, it tells you about people's life. It's a story about a married couple, a husband and a wife, who died minutes apart of the virus. They were married 66 years, and the story is out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, AP. It begins, Bill and Esther Ilniski spent nearly 7 decades together as Christian ministers and missionaries, working in the Caribbean and Middle East before preaching for 40 years in Florida. So when they died minutes apart of COVID-19 this month at a Palm Beach County hospice, it may have been a hidden blessing, their only child, Sarah Milewski, said, even if it was a devastating double loss for her. Her father was 88, her mother 92. Their 67th wedding anniversary would have been this weekend. And they give us a lot of background. They tell us that Bill Ilinsky grew up in Detroit, my hometown here. And then they cover his life of where he went to Bible school, how he met his wife, and all the different places that they served. And they went overseas. They ended up going to Jamaica. They actually were in Lebanon. And then they ended up coming back and settling in Florida. And along the way, they adopted the young lady that is telling the story. So anyways, in 1975, when they were living in Lebanon, the daughter tells us that civil war broke out between Christian and Muslim factions, and Beirut, the nation's capital, became a battleground. Twice, bombs exploded outside their apartment, the first knocking Milewski out of bed, the second slamming her father to the ground. She said, "My mom thought he was dead. My mom and I went and hid in the bathroom all night, crying and praying. The next morning, bullet holes poked the walls of apartments on every floor except theirs." She said, "We attributed that to prayer." In 1976, they fled, and they came when the U.S. Marines evacuated Americans, and they caught the last plane out. Shortly after they returned to the United States, Bill Ilinsky became a pastor at the Calvary Temple in West Palm Beach, later renamed Lighthouse Christian Center International. And his wife Esther started Esther Network International, aimed at teaching children to pray. So they retired about 3 years ago, and when COVID hit, they pretty much stayed indoors. The mom stayed home. She had groceries delivered, but the dad occasionally went out. The daughter said he couldn't take it. He needed to be around people. And then when they visited their parents on Valentine's Day, her mother's birthday, a few days later, her mom became ill. And not long after, the couple were diagnosed with the virus and hospitalized. And then when it didn't look good and the disease overtook them, they went into hospice on February 27. They put them together in the same room for their final days. They said their goodbyes through a window, a microphone carrying "I love you" to her parents' bedside. They looked like they were sleeping, she said, her father lying on the right side and her mother facing him. He would nod as Milewski spoke to him, and her mom tried to speak, but she couldn't. It was horrible. At 10:15 a.m. on March 1, Esther Ilinsky died. 15 minutes later, her husband followed. They were always, always together, Milewski said, so in sync. May God bless them and rest in peace. Another story that ran in the AP talks about that the rapid COVID-19 vaccine rollout had backfired in the United States, in some states. And so, as many of you know, I've complained about the problems of trying to find the vaccine, and it seems like this was the case in many different other states too. Some new analysis has found that states such as South Carolina and Florida that raced ahead of others to offer the vaccine to larger groups of people than those that decided to vaccinate smaller shares of their population that, moved more slowly, such as Hawaii and Connecticut, of course, had problems. They explain that experts say that the rapid expansion of eligibility caused a surge in demand too big for some states to handle and led to serious disarray. Vaccine supplies proved insufficient or unpredictable. Websites crashed and phone lines became jammed, spreading confusion, frustration, and resignation among many people. Yeah, been there, done that. Okay. What else can we tell you? A lot of going on with AstraZeneca and what's happening overseas with that. We've covered most of that last week. It's still not been approved in the United States. And right now we just have 3 vaccinations. Pfizer, Moderna, and the Johnson & Johnson. Okay. A couple of things that I wanted to share with you that the Wall Street Journal ran. They have this thing called the 10-point, which is the name given to the news column on the front page. And here's a few of their questions and answers. In response to the Wall Street Journal's question about what you miss most about the office, because a lot of people are going to be returning to work. Of course, many are allowed to still work remotely until I believe September. Okay, so Owen Yested from Pittsburgh said, "What I miss the most about the office is the sense of context. You could strike up a conversation in the lunchroom with someone in another department and find news affecting your own team. Or you could befriend another manager simply by having neighboring workspaces. Proximity blends silos." Well, Catherine Siobhan, and they don't say where she's from, she said, "Nothing. I don't want to give up working from home. At home, I get more work done and I enjoy life a lot more. During breaks, instead of having to participate in office gossip, I can do a bit of housework. Work-life balance is infinitely easier." David Marquardt from Houston says he misses the people, the camaraderie, the small talk, brainstorming around the conference table, the spontaneous lunches at the new joint down the street, the 4 p.m. happy hours that segue into the weekend. Brittany Franco from New York City said, "After-work drinks." A few responses to the Wall Street Journal's 10-point question and answer to what's the destination you have in mind for your first post-pandemic travel? Well, what's your response to that question? Where would you like to go during your first post-pandemic travel? By the way, bookings for hotels and airline jumped last week. Were you one of them making plans? Lori Laus from Colorado said she'd like to head to the East Coast to Massachusetts. "I'll be visiting my grandmother for her 101st birthday. For 10 years, my aunt warned the entire family to save the date, April 19, 2020, for her 100th birthday bash, only to have it cancel." She said, "I'm vaccinated, Grandma's vaccinated, so let the celebration commence." Derek Fawn from Indiana said, "Visiting kids and grandkids. After that, we are heading to the beach, Fort Lauderdale. While our regular travel plans always included some international travel, we're sticking strictly to U.S.-based travel for now and still being very careful about masking, distancing, and crowds." Good job. Nick Daniscus from Virginia plans, once restrictions ease, to travel to Greece. And he says, "Unbeatable natural beauty, rich history and culture, a safe destination with a developed tourism sector, amazing food and nightlife, This sounds like a commercial. The list goes on, he says. I got so carried away with my wanderlust that I even made a professional slide deck for a TED Talk style team lunch detailing the ins and outs of a Greek vacation alongside plenty of recommendations. My team responded with an extreme desire to take PTO, that stands for paid time off, and proceeded to dub me travel agent analyst. Jim Prue from Kansas says, while many travelers are looking forward to destinations near the mountains or by the water, river, lake, ocean, I'm going to take road trips through America's heartland from upper Michigan to central Kentucky to northwest Iowa to Missouri's small towns. I'll meet real people in real places and avoid the crowds. Think and travel out of the box. Well, that's my idea of a road trip. Who's got similar plans? I'm ready to get in the car and drive west, all the way from Michigan to California. I've done the trek twice, once from Boston to Washington State, with a 4-day rest in Michigan, only to return 4 years later from Cali to Michigan, where I've been since 2004. If you know me, you know I'm always dreaming of California. In tomorrow's Heart and Home podcast, we continue our discussion of what's happened since the March 7 interview that aired on CBS between Oprah Winfrey and the former Success Six. Harry, he got 2 new jobs this week, or it was announced. Sharon Osbourne is out at CBS, and what a review of the British press finds about Meghan Markle's claim that the palace had failed to correct false and damaging stories about her while she was a working member of the royal family, as stated during her March 7 interview with Oprah Winfrey. Well, we'll talk to you tomorrow.